The bell rang at the most businesslike time, 10 a.m. At this hour, she still liked the movie Arrhythmia, the one about the emergency room doctor. But before that, she couldn't understand the main character's girlfriend. The girl returns when the house is buzzing with drunken company. She is invited to join them. She deflects with words say, "Not now, guys, I'm tired." She goes into the next room, closes the door behind her, turns on the music and falls asleep. How can she fall asleep in such a mess, and to a song? When Miranda became an EMT, she understood. Now she could pass out on the bus, or in a concert hall, or at home, even if the ceiling above her was on fire. Especially after a night like tonight. Of course, it's not an ambulance, but it's not much easier. There are times when the duty is more or less calm, but now the labor was a mess. In addition, the older one, with twins, also decided to give birth now. 2 weeks ahead of schedule, by the way. It's a good thing everything went without complications. We didn't have to call for help from surgery. But Miranda went home, as they say, down the wall. When she returned, her husband had already gone to work, leaving behind unwashed dishes and a hungry cat. Miranda caught herself using medical terms in her normal life, too. The gray puddle's pitiful and demanding cries had been controlled with the help of a couple of Purina packets. Then Miranda sat on the stool, unable to decide whether she wanted to eat or sleep. The last thing she wanted to do was move and get up. Finally, she cut off a thicker piece of sausage, drank the sandwich with milk straight from the bottle, and wandered to the bedroom, taking off her clothes as she went. What indescribable bliss it was to collapse into a clean, soft bed, to burrow into the pillows. Sometimes it seemed to Miranda that somewhere down there, deep down, if you climbed into it, there was a childhood left. You could dive into your own bed and come out in one where you were 10 years old and had so much strength that you could fly. But she wasn't flying now. The crow horse kicked her in the stomach with its hoof, but it didn't hurt, only frightened her. Probably if she had been dreaming a good and peaceful dream, the phone call would not have woken her up. But the black horse, multiplied by the mechanical trills coming from the corridor. 100 times Miranda wanted to give up the landline. She wished she and William only had cell phones that could be set to do not disturb. But the apartment belonged to her mother-in-law, and Peggy Urton's principle of life was let it be this applied to everything, from old buttons, which her mother-in-law carefully kept in a wooden box, and to the non-working television set, which had been moved to the pantry. What if it was still useful? The phone went silent, then rang again. Miranda got up as slowly as if she hadn't woken up on the move, but had been revived and was still part zombie. In the hallway, she leaned against a coat rack. Candy Adamson? A voice asked, sounding like it belonged to a very young girl. If the girl pretended to be a special investigator, she could hang up right away. But no, Miranda felt a vengeful feeling. She even wanted the girl to say, "Scammers are trying to make a loan in your name, and you have to help us." Then you can remember the turbulent years of youth, and tax the wench not even 7 stories, but that the size of a skyscraper. The resentment at fate for waking her up was so great that Miranda longed to let the wench's ear melt from her profanity. "It's the assistant notary," the girl said. "You need to come to our place on the Embarcadero to read the will. You have an inheritance. Will you accept it or refuse it? Can you come today? We're open till 6. No, Miranda didn't know why she'd said that. Let's do it tomorrow. Later, she couldn't explain to herself why she had decided to take this pause. And who? Who left me an inheritance? She asked. Can you tell me the name? And what inheritance are we talking about? It's a house. You've been bequeathed a house. Come and have it explained to you. Then the girl got distracted. Someone started to question her. She started to answer the person she was talking to, and a couple of moments later she hung up. Miranda was left at a complete loss. She went back to the bedroom and climbed into bed again. But sleep didn't come to her now. A house. She would have been surprised if someone had left her even a small amount of money. There was no such person. And suddenly a whole house. It would be possible if she had been a social worker, taking care of some lonely old woman. But who gives such gifts to midwives? Miranda tried to think, but something like a premonition stopped her. Don't, it was an inner voice, otherwise you might remember something very, very unpleasant. It was too late. Miranda put her palm to her mouth. She saw that face right in front of her again, those eyes, a rich emerald color like no living person's ever had. Not unless contact lenses. Again, that caressing, ingratiating voice whispered, "And I'll make you a present. You'll get it when the time comes. Then you won't turn away, you won't go away." Has the hour come? Perhaps her family was once an ordinary young family with a husband and wife who love each other and their little daughter. They are almost children themselves, and they sincerely consider her to be the eighth wonder of the world. Only Miranda didn't remember those wonderful times, even if she was dipping her memory deep, deep into the place where all outlines are blurred and reality is so easy and simple to coexist with a fairy tale. For example, she once caught a star. The 5-beam neon blue star was lying in the palm of her hand and glowing. "It's bad for star on Earth," said Mom. "Let's let her go to the sky." And as soon as Miranda unclenched her fingers, the star, easily like an air bubble or a balloon, began to rise. Miranda still believed it had really happened. Her mother only laughed when she mentioned it. Another time Miranda was flying. She and Daddy were walking through town. There was a blizzard, very strong winds, and real snow swirls. And she was about 3 years old. Daddy held her hand, but the wind picked her up and carried her. It was a tiny distance, just 2 or 3 steps, but a real flight. These are the only 2 memories of a happy family. But it's so easy to say, even to yourself, if you're sober nonsense, it never happened, it couldn't have happened. And what was real, on the one hand, my father somewhere far away in a distant northern city. On the other, Mom and stepdad. My father never came, only called 3 or 4 times a year. And he sent gifts. A reindeer hat, pine nuts for Miranda, and money for what her daughter needed by postal order in her mother's name. And Mom and stepdad had careers. Later, when Miranda watched Western movies with an adult eye, she thought they would fit in perfectly in this life where careers ruled the roost. No, stepfather never hurt his stepdaughter, and Mom was quite attentive whether she needed to take Miranda to the children's clinic or celebrate her birthday. Mom never forgot not only the important, but even the little things, and did everything flawlessly. My mom worked as a lawyer, and her memory was phenomenal. She memorized all her clients, even their phone numbers, by heart, and if you woke her up at night, she could recite the pages of a case like poetry. If she undertook to defend someone, almost with 100% probability this person could celebrate victory in advance. The stepfather was in the construction business. Miranda took it literally. Her stepfather was tied up in the construction business, but he was in love with his bonds, business trips, clients, new projects. He could only talk about these things at home. And my mother about court hearings, about the defense arguments, about sarcastic prosecutors and their triumphs, more like a victory in a fight. And so often one would say to the other stepmother's stepfather, or vice versa, "I'm proud of you." This pride was evident. During the time my mother lived in her second marriage, they changed several apartments, each time moving to a more spacious one and closer to the historical center. The brands of cars changed. The resorts to which my mother and stepfather went on vacation became more and more prestigious and expensive. And on the other side was Miranda and her life. For a while, a long time ago, Mom had wanted them to be friends. And then it just sort of went straight to another dimension. It's good that you're growing up on your own. Soon you'll be living on your own, and then. Miranda used to go camping. She was 12 years old when she joined the Young Hikers Club. The leader of the hikers was the same, the restless Margot, with a stick up her ass, as her stepfather used to say. And so it began. Every weekend, a hike in the surrounding mountains, even in winter. They returned in the early twilight, drunk with frost, hungry, because there was never enough tea in the thermos and pies, and did not hurry to scatter home, but sat in the club exchanging impressions, telling stories, making plans. And Miranda came home the way her stepfather probably came home to the hotel on business trips just to spend the night. And during the vacations. Then we'd take a train to some glorious city, and Margot would swear because the guys would play The City Goes to Sleep and The Mob Wakes Up all night long, and the girls would lock themselves in the bathroom and spend half an hour there to put on makeup with sense, with purpose, with care. And really, you can't walk around San Francisco without makeup. It's like going barefoot in the street. Or we rafted down the river in kayaks, went on the Zhigulevskaya around the world trip, or on a horseback ride. If Miranda had been asked about her plans in those years, she would have said she would never settle down, never put down roots somewhere in one place like those closest to her did. She wants a house on the water, some sort of very simple yacht. And after the small journeys, the big journeys are sure to follow. when now you can go to Ireland, to the Emerald Isle. You can live in a haunted castle, dance in the street on St. Patrick's Day, and then pull up the anchors and sail to the opposite end of the earth somewhere in New Zealand, to another Emerald Island, so that the whole world can be hugged like that pillow before going to sleep, and enjoy its beauty when reality is more beautiful than any dream. Soon, very soon, she will be on her own feet, and then goodbye to the cold house and the ambitious dreams of its inhabitants. She has enough of herself and a backpack on her back. Her family are sober people and know that their desires have limits. And what Miranda wanted was always over the top. And she did not try to seize what she admired, to appropriate it for herself. It was enough for her that she saw it, that it existed under the sun. All these amazing cities, castles, waterfalls, depths. And then everything changed and ended. In one day, or rather one evening. The very night the circus came to town. No, she wasn't going to go to the show. Miranda avoided taking money from her mother unless she could do without it. When she started earning her own money, that would be different. It was just a spring evening on her way back from the club. She was on her way through the park, and there was a colorful tent, and the wagons were close together, one to another. Everyone around was enjoying the warmth, almost the first of the year. Already they wanted to throw off their coats and jackets. Already they could see the coming summer ahead. There was a queue at the iron fence at the entrance, where they were checking tickets. Miranda had never seen so many children all winter, both very young, in strollers, and a little older, and almost all of them were holding white and cotton candy clouds. Miranda was drawn to the carriages. They were so different in this celebration of life, tired, with peeling paint, with wheels that had measured thousands of kilometers. They smelled of sweat, old age, and cheap powder. Miranda stroked one of them with the palm of her hand, a motion of compassion. "Come here," she suddenly heard a voice say. It wasn't someone real calling out to her, a voice sounded in her head. Please, it didn't say, but Miranda realized that this someone was asking for her. She almost whispered back, but how, and immediately realized what she had to do. Just get on all fours, or even crawl, and crawl into that circle. But in the carriages, live circus performers and their animals. And of course she'd be chased out of here right away. At best they'll call her a fool, because there are predators here. At worst they'll think she was trying to steal something. But she couldn't refuse the voice. And so, moving like a caterpillar, pushing with her legs and knees, she crawled the few meters. Now the voice sounded as if the unknown man were speaking directly into her ear. "Let me out." She jerked, tried to look around, and immediately banged her head painfully against the metal bottom of the wagon. No one was near her, but someone was calling out to her. At the same time, Miranda saw that there was no one on the small platform that the cars surrounded on all sides. Then she decided to climb out. That cage was right above her. Above where she had just crawled. There was no other way to call it a cage because it was a frequent grating, and inside it sat a man. A boy about the same age as her. He was looking at her, but his lips did not move, and she heard it clearly again. "Let me out. Open the latch. No one should be in a cage, no living thing. My mother told me that once, when Miranda was a little girl and they took her to the sea. Every time she passed a fisherman, she tried to save a single fish. Stealthily snatch it from the bucket and release it into the sea. But now she wasn't at all sure she could handle the lock. Just pull the latch to the side. It sticks sometimes. Pull it hard, one pull." That impatient voice ... Did it actually sound, or did she hear it in her head? Miranda pulled the latch with both hands, writhing with effort. Then she stood on her tiptoes and pushed against it with her skinny body. And that's when the latch finally slid sideways, smooth as butter. The boy was already standing near the door, and when he heard the click, he opened it with lightning speed. And faster than Miranda realized what was happening, he slid under the wagon and was gone. "Who are you? What's your name?" "I'll find you, Miranda," she said. And before she could answer, the last words came out. She needed to get out of here as fast as the former prisoner had disappeared. But at the same moment, she saw an older man. More like an old man, a tall, thin man in a blue shirt and jeans. He was carrying 2 buckets, probably on his way to feed the animals. When he saw the open cage, he did not set it down, but dropped his burden and raised his palms. "I only got here now ... I'm late ... Didn't manage to stop you ... girl. What did you do?" "What's that boy in there for?" "He's being punished, isn't he?" Miranda asked, trying to establish some kind of rapport with the old man. But the man only shook his head. "Maybe it's a good thing you did it, but what happens now? Get out of here if you can." Miranda didn't have time to take his advice. A woman entered the small area, surrounded by carriages and hidden from view. She was about 35 years old, and there was so much inner strength in her that even her step was dancing. Her dark hair hung to her shoulders, and she was very pretty, but that wasn't what impressed Miranda. The woman was eating a rose. Yes, she was holding a red rose on a long stem and devouring it voluptuously like ice cream. The old man seemed to hold his breath the moment the woman saw the open door and the empty cage. She raised her thin eyebrows in surprise and turned around to the old man. It said without words that she was waiting for an explanation. The old man waved his hands. "I only came now. I saw for myself what you saw. It was too late to run." And Miranda braced herself for the reprimand she was about to receive. The boy probably deserved a severe punishment, and she'd set him free. The woman handed the old man the tattered flower and walked toward Miranda. The closer she came, the more uncomfortable she felt. When the stranger leaned over her so that Miranda could feel her breath on her, she was seized with an irrational terror. The woman held her by the shoulder, and her fingers were strong, as if made of metal. "You stole from us, sweetheart." It took Miranda gathering all her courage to answer. "But if that boy lives with you, he'll come back. He'll go for a walk and then he'll come back." "He's not coming back." A smile appeared on the woman's lips, and Miranda felt as if she were about to share the rose's fate. The stranger bent down, and there's no way out. Bright green eyes, that glowing hue that no living person could ever have, stared straight at her. "For what you have done, you will get a present." The woman's voice became ingratiating, cooing, like a predator enjoying her prey. "Oh, not now. But the hour will come, and you will surely get it. You won't be able to refuse my gift, and then nothing will save you. Get out." Her fingers loosened on Miranda's shoulder, but the pain remained. The girl felt that her right arm was barely obeying her, just a whip. The old man hurriedly, nudging her in the back, led her out of the courtyard and onto the wicket, behind which the people with tickets were crowding. Stepping back a few steps, Miranda turned around. The old man was still looking at her, shaking his head. The expression on his face was as if he were saying goodbye to someone who was hopelessly ill. "Maybe I shouldn't go." Miranda asked her husband for the umpteenth time. "It's probably a divorce ... who would bequeath the house to me. Neither my dad nor my mom would do that. And besides, we're talking about a will, and they're still alive. Thank God ... She hoped William would listen to her. He liked to amuse himself by talking to crooks. When he received another warning that someone had gained access to his bank deposit, he would make himself comfortable on the sofa and say, feigning alarm, that he had millions in his account, and of course he was very worried about them. Therefore, of course, he was ready to fulfill all the orders of the investigator. Then followed a half-hour conversation, during which William pretended to be an idiot who had to explain everything 20 times. And only when he had driven the crooks to a frenzy did he laugh obscenely loud, send them to the mother lode, and call it a day. But now her husband was unaccustomedly serious. "Let's go there and find out," he suggested. "There really is a notary at that address, and has been for years," he said. "If it's a stupid joke, they'll explain it to us. We're not risking anything." What if? Well, what the hell? I had to agree to it heartily. And it was so fortunate that on the day Miranda had bargained for, they were both free. The young woman had even mapped out an escape route for herself. If the inheritance turns out to be a hoax, they will go to a small bistro nearby as a sign of moral compensation. The ice cream cocktails there were very good. And it's been so long since they've been out together with William. In fact, Miranda was prepared to have the notary's office point them out the door as soon as she said her last name. "That's the first we've heard. There's no inheritance for you. And no one called you." But they were politely invited to wait in the reception area. They had to wait in line for an hour. Miranda was getting more and more nervous, occasionally taking her husband's hand and squeezing it tightly. Then she let go and looked at William with a guilty smile. He nodded reassuringly, saying, "Wait, it'll all work out." Finally, their turn came, and now the notary, a blooming woman in her 50s, pulls out papers from a file and reads out in her usual rapid-fire voice that the will makes Candy Adamson the owner of the house located at. William's face reflected complete amazement. It was a dream to live in a place like this. An ancient boulevard that stretched through the center of the city and ended at the foot of the mountains. They had never hoped to live in one of these mansions. It was simply impossible. Probably we're talking about some backwoods chicken shed after all. Miranda, on the other hand, had other things to worry about. How she interjected. "Could you please tell me the name of the woman who left me all this?" "Tiffany Gilbert," the notary read in syllables. "I knew her. She came to me many times. Her grandson was a troublemaker, a drunk. But the grandmother herself was wonderful. Almost to the last day she was running around the stores by herself with those Nordic poles. She survived the blockade, by the way." Things got very confusing. To the notary, too. The woman pushed her glasses up on her nose and shifted her eyes from Miranda to William and back again. "So you're saying you didn't know her at all?" "What about that son of hers?" William asked. "In order to change the conversation, he won't sue us? After all, he probably hoped to inherit from his mother." "The son, as far as I know, died before she did. It's not uncommon for alcoholics to have parents who get over them. Maybe that's what got Tiffany Gilbert down." "And how did the grandmother blockade survivor get such a house?" "As far as I know, such old ladies have time to save up for their funerals and only." "Her husband was a famous man." The notary's voice became drier, as if William's over-suspiciousness was unpleasant to her. "So ... sign here ... now here." It didn't seem to occur to the notary that such an inheritance could be refused. William, too, waited impatiently for Miranda to sign here, and wherever there was a check mark. So the young woman went outside as a homeowner. Miranda and William looked at each other. They both had the same thought to go to see. "Hold on, I'll call my mom," William said, and pulled out his phone. Miranda didn't want to see Peggy Urton again, but she understood her husband. Mom had been with him all her life, and Miranda had only been with him for 3 years. So he wanted to share his joy with someone he'd become diffusely attached to. Miranda mentally groaned her scientific terms again. She couldn't think or speak otherwise. Peggy Urton was apparently so shocked that she took the unprecedented step of calling a cab. Normally she would have considered this a hobby and calculated how much of her pension would be eaten up by such a millionaire's game. But when they reached the house, Peggy Urton was already there. They recognized the mansion from a distance because a familiar figure was walking along the sidewalk and wringing her hands in delight. She believed in this miracle that had fallen on their heads. Maybe because she'd been waiting for miracles all her life, dreamed of winning the lottery or find the treasure, waiting for God to say to her, as in the commercials, "You deserve it." "Did you bring the key?" was the first thing Peggy Urton asked, forgetting to say hello. William spread his hands. "We just wanted to see." It was a house of old brick, of some dull purple color. It had arched windows, a mezzanine, a balcony with a wrought iron lattice, and a front lawn, like the neighboring mansions. "How could you not even know about the key?" Peggy Urton reprimanded. "We have to figure out the scope of work." Miranda looked at her in bewilderment and noted that it was probably the first time her mother-in-law had ever treated her as an equal. Miranda had been in disgrace before, and often when they met, her mother-in-law spoke only to her son, and it was as if her daughter-in-law were not even there. There was an official reason, of course. "She takes other people's children, but she can't have her own," her mother-in-law had once said, and Miranda had heard it. But in her heart, Miranda thought she just didn't like her mother-in-law. There are times when a person arouses antipathy, and no matter how much you smash him to pieces. Now Peggy Urton was excitedly explaining to her specifically. "I can already see that the windows here need to be changed. We can measure them today and order plastic ones. I know a company that gives senior citizens a discount." "How can you ruin such an antique?" Miranda wondered. Then a neighbor called out to them. Peggy Urton hurried to her, asking for the key, and it turned out that there was a key, and the neighbor was about to bring it out. Miranda hesitated, delaying until the last minute, the moment when there would be no way out and she would have to enter the house. On the other side, an elderly neighbor was mowing his lawn and occasionally glanced curiously at the new tenants. Miranda took a few steps in his direction. "Did you buy a house or something?" the neighbor asked. It was an inheritance, Miranda said, her tone apologetic to Miranda's surprise. Not only did the old man not congratulate her, he did not say anything friendly, as one might expect. On the contrary, he nodded his head as if in sympathy. "Are you going to turn it in?" he asked, as if still hoping for something. No, Miranda glanced around. The door was open, so her husband and mother-in-law were already checking out the new property. "I guess we'll be moving here ourselves." The old man lost interest in her and went back to his lawnmower. "Why did you ask?" Miranda asked before she left. He shrugged. "Because it's not going to end well. Nobody lives here for long." "You don't like it?" Miranda asked cautiously. The old man shrugged. "Sorry, I didn't get a chance to ask. Today the tenants are still here, and they don't seem to be going anywhere, and tomorrow they're gone. No one's been here more than a year." "Excuse me, but the landlady?" Miranda suddenly remembered she's owned this house for years. So she didn't live here. She was a renter. I only ever saw her when she came to meet the new tenants and show them around. What would scare them away? It didn't sound like a direct question, but like Miranda was thinking out loud. The old man was silent for a moment, then pointed a bony finger toward the house. "I've been living here myself for 50 years, so I can't say that others don't like it. But I've worked it out. If the shutter's close, you're waiting for new tenants." "What do you mean?" Miranda asked in confusion. "The landlady would come, close the shutters, and then bring the people who wanted to rent the house." Nope. The old tenants were still here. You know, people aren't used to shutters. It doesn't even occur to them to close them at night. Why is it that one evening the shutters are suddenly closed? And nobody opens them in the morning? A day or two goes by and the landlady brings someone new. She unlocks the windows and doors and shows the house in all its glory. "If you're going to live here, you might be able to clear up this mystery." Miranda saw her husband walking toward her from the house, and that he was happy as can be, smiling ear to ear. "Don't you want to look at it?" he asked before he could approach. "Go take a look. You'll like it." "I doubt it," Miranda muttered quietly. The men shook hands, and William spoke again. Miranda realized at once that he was stinking with joy. She called it verbal incontinence. His husband talked about everything at once, straying from topic to topic. He asked if the rent was high and what was the land tax. He always mentioned that he was glad to meet the neighbors, and of course shared his plans for what he wanted to build here. A garage and a bathhouse first and foremost. The old man listened aloofly, and eventually the animation in William's voice began to fade. "Come on," her husband took Miranda's hand. "You'll see how nice it is inside. You'll like it." She really liked it. The corridor is very wide and bright, and the windows look out onto the garden. And in winter you can put plants in tubs and look at the greenery all year round. Big rooms. And where there was a hall, as they call the most spacious room, would fit their entire current apartment. Peggy Urton's eyes lit up, and she talked so enthusiastically about the renovations as if the house belonged to her, as if Miranda was nobody. The young woman only noted this, but took no offense. She waited politely for her mother-in-law to shut up and felt sorry for the way things had turned out. William sensed something. "Do you agree with everything Mom suggests?" he asked. "Is there anything you'd like to change?" Peggy Urton stopped precisely at a run-up. She looked at Miranda, as if she were looking at an unfortunate obstacle that might interfere with her plans. But the young woman only shook her head. "I don't really care. Do as you see fit. Vitya, when we take Mom, let's stop at a cafe and order a large cocktail." William liked to remember how they met. He thought it was very beautiful and romantic. Miranda had gone on vacation with her mother and stepfather. Not because she had succumbed to her mother's entreaties. It was just that the camping trip Margot had planned had fallen through. The head of the hiking club ended up in the hospital. She had to have her gallbladder removed as a matter of urgency. "I've been going somewhere all my life, eating what's cooked in a cauldron. Some porridge with stew. How can I be healthy?" Miranda was very upset then. All winter long she had dreamed of these 2 weeks on horseback and in her native mountains. The starry sky at night, the legends Margot was good at telling, the honeyed smell of flowers, the tea that smelled of smoke, and the camaraderie that was the strongest in the world. Her mother noticed Miranda walking around upset, her eyes wet, found out what was wrong, and solved the problem in one fell swoop. "You're coming to Egypt with us," she said, "and don't be naughty, please. It's a great hotel, and you'll find something to do without us if you're bored." The stepfather expressed neither joy nor displeasure, and the matter of the trip was settled. Miranda was going into her senior year of high school that summer. She hadn't vacationed with her mother in a long time, and now that she was looking at her with adult eyes, she wondered if her mother was partying her ass off. Usually reserved, energetic, decisive, a real businesswoman, now she behaved like a child, ready to agree to any adventure. "Jump into the water from the rocks, please. A party on a yacht in the open sea, she is the first. To try some new exotic dish, give only a fork." And even at the disco, her mother danced as if she were 20 years younger than she really was. If that's what she considers real life, if that's what she is, how can she suppress it for a whole year? Miranda thought. So it's back home, mom's not real, keeping herself in line. How hard that must be. She herself remained as she had always been. She couldn't stand the heat very well, and it was hard to tempt her to go sightseeing or stroll the local streets. But the hotel was nice, and Miranda spent most of her time in its coolness. But she liked the sea very much. Miranda was not a good swimmer, and her greatest pleasure was just sitting in the water, wearing a mask, and looking at everything around her, at the magnificent underwater world. Mom noticed this and organized a scuba diving trip. With an instructor, of course, but the swarthy guy, who swam like a fish, paid more attention to his mother and stepfather than to Miranda. He decided to show them some underwater caves. The girl, however, found herself in the depths, at some point panicked, and she immediately became short of breath. Perhaps the worst thing is to panic. In the blue haze surrounding you from all sides, you can no longer understand where the top is, where the bottom is. You try to surface, you get desperate, because the surface is not approaching. Your movements become cramped, your throat spasms. It was good that William had been there at that moment and had picked up Miranda, who was hysterical, and surfaced with her. He had said many times afterward that he didn't know what would have happened without him. And Miranda could sense that he was proud of himself. Then they did not part for the rest of the vacation. Miranda's mother, who had not even noticed the incident, was pleased that her daughter had found herself a good boy. William introduced Miranda to his parents, but the girl immediately felt that Peggy Urton did not like her. Probably the latter thought that Miranda was too simple for her son. William was a tall, handsome boy, and here she was a tanned, ponytailed brat. But the young people spent almost all their time together, and no one could prevent them. And the memory of the underwater adventure, of saving the girl, remained the most vivid and dear for William. Now Miranda had the feeling that her husband was drowning, and now it was her turn to save the day. Jeremy had been told from childhood that he was a special child, but he hadn't noticed it for a long time. Reading other people's thoughts was as easy for him as noticing that it was raining or sunny outside. He answered questions before his parents had time to ask them, and it was useless to secretly think up a birthday present for him. And when he was a baby, he often embarrassed his mother on walks by telling her in his sonorous baby voice what people were thinking as they walked toward him. ... But he didn't want anything that time. Honestly, he was old enough, 10 years old, to control himself perfectly well. And by the way, he'd never really liked the circus. His classmates had dragged him to see the show. And he could have gotten away with it. He would have left the circus with the rest of them, if he hadn't been so stupidly caught in the act. When the magician, who looked very tired and not at all fun at heart, asked someone from the audience to help him, Jeremy, to his misfortune, volunteered. He was blindfolded, forced to turn his back, and the magician went into the auditorium to hide a crystal egg from someone in the audience. Then the magician removed a thick black blindfold from Jeremy's eyes and waved his hand in the direction of the gathered people. They said, "Choose who has it." It was supposed to start a game of cold and hot, but Jeremy did not think for a minute. He said, pointing with his chin at a heavy-set man. And he advised, "You'd better switch at once. He will give you the egg, and you will give him the live rooster. After all, you still wanted to get it and say that the uncle had hatched it out of the egg, like a hen." The audience laughed, and the magician laughed. After the show, the circus performers, though whether they were circus performers, vampires, or evil sorcerers was more like them, asked Jeremy how he'd done it, and what else he could do. He spoke honestly about his abilities, adding that he gets along well with them in ordinary life, and he is not going to perform in the circus. The most beautiful of the women ruffled his hair. "Think about it. If you ride with us, you'll be rich and famous. We can ask your parents to let you go." Jeremy even laughed. imagining how his dad and mom would react to such a suggestion. They'd worry if he was half an hour late at school or at a friend's birthday party. They'd let him go to who knows where, with who knows who. I don't know. Finally, Jeremy was released, and he ran out into the park, drenched in the last rays of the sun, which was about to disappear over the horizon. His friends were waiting for him, and everything seemed to be the same as usual running home with the boys. A delicious dinner prepared by his mother's stew with potatoes and cakes for tea. But it was as if someone had put an ice flake down his neck, and it wouldn't melt. And the next morning, hurrying to school, he saw the very beauty from the circus. She stood slender, flexible, in black leather pants, standing near the corner of the house, and to all appearances, waiting for him. "Come here a minute," he heard him say. Only then, much later, did he realize that the woman had not uttered a word aloud. Had there been a witness to the scene, he would have said that the stranger had been silent. But her thoughts were so clear and strong that he went to them as to a call. Then he saw a van around the corner, and a moment later a black handkerchief fell across his face. ... Over the years, they've used different ways to keep him. They tied him by a rope, chained him, kept him in a cage. His attempts to escape were especially desperate and hopeless at first, when he knew his parents were searching for him and going mad with anxiety. From here, from afar, he couldn't read their thoughts, but he could feel how they felt, and it brought him to tears, to the point of wanting, like an animal caught in a trap, to chew off a limb and escape. But he did not compete with ordinary people. He realized that at once. His attempts were anticipated with a smile and thwarted. He was punished, but not cruelly. They could have done anything to him, for he was at their mercy. But they never hit him, never physically hurt him. More often than not, they just left him hungry, sometimes for days at a time. The traveling circus continued to travel the world, and it seemed to Jeremy that he was trapped in some ruthless mechanism, and it was impossible to get out of it, only to obey. Sometimes, very rarely, he was forced to take part in the performances, and he invariably surprised the audience to the point of exclaiming, "It can't be. It's a hell of a thing." But the main thing that was expected of him was to find others like himself. Those who could understand him when not a single word was spoken aloud, when only a mental conversation was going on. There were such people, even if only occasionally. Of course, none of them had a gift equal to the one Jeremy had. All of them turned out to be weaker than him. There were those who could see the future, but Jeremy had never met a strong clairvoyant. The people he'd pointed out had been introduced to the circus people, talked to them. And Jeremy subconsciously expected that sooner or later one of them would end up next to him in the cage. But it didn't happen. When he asked Ada, the very beauty who was in charge of them all, she only smiled. "You're the best. You're all we need. Even I can't stand to be around you." "Why do you need all these people?" he wondered. And then she spoke the very words he thought. "It's a fairy tale. It can't be real. Because of these people, we are practically immortal. Our lives don't end." And that girl who helped Jeremy eventually escape, they must have seen her as a tidbit too. Peggy Urton was learning the finer points of repair. God knows where she got her information. If she'd ever cared about the subject before, it was only in terms of envy of her friends. Peggy Urton was a homebody. Almost always something kept her from going out. In winter, ice on the streets, I'll slip and break my femoral neck, and you'll have to take care of me summer heat. I can only exist under air conditioning. Spring and fall had their own resonances. And the main means of communication with the world remained the telephone and a friend. And Peggy Urton's life remained bland and uninteresting compared to that of her friends. There were dacha feats, overcoming themselves, unimaginable harvests and industrial-scale harvesting. Sagas concerning grandchildren and granddaughters, their health, their pranks, words, gifts. And of course, His Majesty repair ideas and their realization, exciting search for materials, handy or handless sons and sons-in-law, and finally the triumphant completion of the process to begin tomorrow to change something, because there is no limit to perfection. Against this background, Peggy Urton had nothing to tell. No country house, only flowers on the balcony, no grandchildren, only a cat at the young, and it was better not to even talk about repairs, because her friends comparing with her own would have found Peggy Urton's place murdered. The only thing the elderly woman was saving for was her own funeral. After the sudden death of her husband from a heart attack, she went into debt, and now she did not want to repeat the same story about herself. But even here she was disappointed. Her son only laughed. "Mom, there's no one left on top of the earth. They're all buried somehow. Or do you want a crystal coffin and telephone service in the other world?" "I want you not to be ashamed," Peggy Urton began. "Would you to be honest care anymore?" Her friends, on the other hand, spoke with feigned sighs. "Oh, we're trying to save something too. But my granddaughter is studying in St. Petersburg. I'm helping her pay the rent. My grandson wants to change the car. My daughter needs a kitchen set." It appeared that Peggy Urton had set herself some small, secondary goal, and it was weighing her down. But now it's going to turn around. A luxurious house, a real estate. Fixing it up is not like fixing up a high-rise apartment. Peggy Urton withdrew her funeral stash, sold the shares left by her husband. But her friends, pining with envy, gave her a disturbing thought. Peggy Urton immediately summoned her son and had a long conversation with him. That same evening, William told Miranda with a nervous chuckle, "Mom wants you to sign over part of the house to her. She has invested a lot of money in renovations. So here she collected all the receipts and handed them to me for you to look at." They had never had a fight over anything material before money. Things ... William was ready to back down. But what he hadn't expected was for his wife to shine. "Do you think your mom would mind if I signed the whole house over to her? Would she accept a gift like that?" "Are you serious?" "This is as serious as it gets. I'm willing to sign a deed of gift with the same notary." Needless to say, Peggy Urton had a sleepless night when she learned of this. Plans swarmed in her head, and each one was better than the last. Then she saw a garden, a beautiful garden, in an equally beautiful old neighborhood of the city, not in the outskirts of the city, where her friends' cottages were. Then she dreamed of eventually getting rid of the modern cheap stuff and furnishing the old house exclusively with antiques. Then she imagined a housewarming party, and her friends, out of curiosity, of course, would come running and be amazed. That's when it would be their turn to bite their elbows. In the morning, Peggy Urton called her daughter-in-law, not her son, but for the first time. She spoke to her with unusual warmth. Miranda was to come, by all means, and see how she was organizing the house. "It will be your inheritance after my death anyway," said the mother-in-law. Miranda shrugged as if the room was suddenly cold. She had put off this moment until the last minute, but now she had to go. Her mother-in-law showed her the house with the air of a tour guide who had her own personal museum. "And this is where the living room will be. Look at it, it's so pretty. It might be a little dark in the summer because the windows overlook the garden. The lilac bushes will grow ... I want to hang a big crystal chandelier here. I don't care if they say it's last century. The house needs the last century. And I want a fireplace. Then we can make a real one, by the way. I know how to make a stove. I learned it from my grandmother when I was a kid. In the meantime, we'll put in an electric fireplace, but to have a very good imitation of a live fire." Miranda had been following Peggy Urton from room to room for the past half hour, and the polite smile on her face made her cheekbones ache. Her mother-in-law regretted that the dining room wasn't ready yet, so coffee would have to be had in the kitchen. "And it's cozier there," she added, "and it's 2 steps from here to the pastry shop, so I bought an amazing cake. You take a walk around, see if you have any requests. And I'll call you to the table in 10 minutes. Miranda was alone with the house. Her first impression was that the place was always in semi-darkness. Peggy Urton could talk all she wanted about the crystal chandeliers and the fireplace, but even on a sunny day, the rays wouldn't reach here. Most of the windows faced north, and the shutters, and the lilac bushes, and the mezzanine balcony ... In short, it was dark without artificial light. Miranda went out into the hallway to find where the kitchen was. Suddenly she was overtaken by that distinctive smell. The smell of the circus. The smell of horse sweat. The tart smell of predators. Fresh sawdust, butterscotch, and baked goods. There was no smell of risk or applause. Miranda tried to figure out where the smell was coming from. How could it be if the painters had recently left the house? She opened one door after another and then stopped at the threshold of a small closet. Here she saw scraps of playbills on the floor, a pile of brightly colored costumes, some strange black hat, a makeup table. Miranda appealed to her sanity. Was it conceivable for Peggy Urton to keep all this stuff, not throw it away? After all, from her point of view, it was junk. Miranda blinked. The closet was empty. It hadn't been renovated, but there was no beggar here. except for the shabby walls, the board floor, and a window in the ceiling so narrow a cat couldn't fit through. The odor was much fainter now. She put her palms to her nose, and sure enough, she had just used them to grasp the door handle. She had just used them to grasp the doorknob. The odor was still there, so she had to wash her hands immediately. The bathtub was quickly found. Barbara Taylor had already had her hands in it, the ornate tile, the modern sink, the lighted mirror. Miranda shook the water off her hands and looked down at herself, petrified. A skull was staring straight into her eyes, empty black eye sockets. Not a human skull, a dog skull, and the mirror didn't show the bathroom itself. Just the skull, just darkness. Miranda not only clamped her eyes shut, she covered her face with her hands. She was afraid the skull would speak to her, and the sounds would be like a voice or a bark. When she opened her eyes, she could still see the terrible vision fading away. It gave way to her own face, deathly pale with widened eyes. "Where did you disappear to?" My mother-in-law was standing on the doorstep, the coffee's getting cold. "My God, it's as if you've seen a ghost. Come with me, I'll give you some drops." After escaping from confinement, Jeremy ended up in an orphanage. Not right away, of course. First he tried to find his parents, and for that he had to get from the other side of the country to his hometown. He had no experience of homelessness, and he had never had to worry about food or lodging before. So Jeremy had a hard time, but somewhere hitchhiking, perfecting himself in inventing pathetic stories that could touch the harsh truckers, he still reached his home. And he learned that his mother and father no longer lived there. The father died soon after the disappearance of his son, and where the mother could have gone the neighbors did not even guess. The woman didn't share her plans with them. Maybe she could no longer see the house, where everything reminded her of her family. And if so, she probably changed the city too. He could have kept looking, but it was winter, and Jeremy was so exhausted and depleted that he acted foolishly, without thinking of the consequences. He slept in the cellars, if he could get into them, and he scrounged whatever food he could get. For example, he would go into the bistro, and while the tables were still being cleared, he would snatch a piece of bread that had been forgotten, or a pie that had not been eaten. He wore himself to rags and eventually ended up in the police station, and from there, in an orphanage. Hungry and struggling to survive. Jeremy didn't notice that he had lost his gift, and if he had, he wouldn't have regretted it. After the way fate had treated him, he considered the gift a curse, and was glad to be rid of it. But it turned out that his ability to read other people's thoughts did not disappear, but as if hibernated in hard times. And as soon as the boy warmed up and ate a little, everything came back. But now Jeremy knew that he had to treat his gift as if it were a potent substance, use it only when it was absolutely necessary. And he had to hide his gift from others so that no one would even realize it. Jeremy was fortunate in that he'd come to the orphanage after he'd mourned his parents, and he was sure he'd never find his mother. Either his tears had dried up forever. Neither sentimentality nor self-pity was in him anymore, but he was always waiting for the next blow of fate, and was ready to respond to it at least with sharp, boyish fists. And it paid off. In the orphanage, he was not bullied, he was not mocked. On the contrary, he even earned some respect. Everyone knew that he had no relatives, that he had been vagabonding for a long time. Usually such kids are not interested in studying. Sometimes they can hardly even read. Jeremy pounced on the science, as if he knew he needed it, that he couldn't do without it. The boys tried to tease him, they trumped him with their ability to sass the teacher, but Jeremy cut off such taunts at once. He began with a florid phrase, almost entirely made up of foul words. It was an invitation to be listened to. And then he said he wasn't going to work a penny job or drink himself to death. "Life owes me a lot," he teased. Spitting through a knocked-out tooth was convenient. But what even the teachers, accustomed to their pups going to college at best, didn't expect was that Jeremy applied to medical school and passed the competition. There was no one around him with whom he could share his designs. "You'll learn, biology teacher. You're good. We'll be treated by you later." And Jeremy wanted to deal with the superpowers of man, and to understand what nature gave him, and what these terrible people, who almost broke his life, hoped to get from him. His brain was designed for scientific work. None of his classmates had such a tenacious memory, such a pronounced ability to generalize and analyze. And in his senior year, his mentors had already said definitely that Jeremy had a place in graduate school, that he should think about a PhD. As he had no one to support him, he worked part-time at the hospital in his spare time. He did not want to stay in a hostel, and as soon as the opportunity arose, he rented an apartment. That was the beginning of his library and card catalog. He collected very specific things. There was a lot written on the subject that interested him, but he did not want to chase sensation but facts. And also he was tracing the path of the very circus that seemed immortal. One could leaf through old newspapers, go deeper and deeper into the past, and be convinced the troupe existed even then. It kept traveling around the world. But at the same time it described a circle, invariably at regular intervals, returning to the same city. And the circusmen stayed there not in hotels, not in the most run-down motels. The same house beckoned them, as if it were their own. They put their carriages in its yard, and from here they started their new wanderings around the world. More and more often the Ouroboros came to Jeremy's mind the most ancient symbol, the snake biting its tail, the alternation of creation and destruction, life and death, the beginning of a new cycle. And if he mosaicked all the evidence he had gathered, if he could believe the picture, it was only a matter of time before the new cycle began. In a short time they would be there again, in that town, near that house. It was frightening to think about. I wondered if that girl who had saved him back then had survived. Jeremy thought of her from time to time. He hoped she hadn't had to pay for it. But himself, was he still so attractive to them, to this traveling troupe? He felt he was. Which meant he had to go there to test a hunch. And to do that, he needed the circus people to know where he was. This whole thing was a hell of a bait and switch. He knew he'd get drunk, but it had to be done thoughtfully, to get to that point that only you can feel, when the fear that my mom that was a century ago called ugly recedes. Instead of fear comes the feeling that now, as in some game, you are going to take up a sword and go to crush your enemies left and right, not thinking that you yourself might fall from a dashing blow. He needed that kick from his subconscious to cross a line he'd been afraid to think about before. And at the same time, he didn't want to get so full that there would be a feeling of swings, and he'd be dizzy, and the fear would be replaced by despair at his own helplessness. Apparently, the higher powers decided that he was doing the right thing, because the hotel was found instantly. And according to the map, it was near the train station. It didn't matter to Jeremy what conditions he would live in. If he was alive in a few days, he would leave this city and try to forget it forever. And if he had nightmares in his sleep, it wouldn't be a lousy number. He threw his bag on the bed, locked the door again, and went to find a bar where he could sit for a long time without being disturbed. A boulevard crossing the center of the city started from the station square. Everything here was so bright, so light, so benign, and so far from what his soul was full of. Two white trees like emerald candles, beds of roses, souvenir stands. He peered around the bar with the kind of painful scrutiny that a sick man would look for in a drugstore. At last he caught sight of the basement. The heavy door at this hour of the morning was open to his surprise, and he hurried downstairs. And in the cool, semi-darkness of the place, you couldn't tell the day was just beginning. Not a single customer yet. Jeremy was the first. He chose a table in the far corner, asked the bartender to open a bottle of whiskey, and bring some kind of appetizer. He thought he'd learned to control himself. But the whiskey had come earlier, and Jeremy poured himself a bottle of whiskey. So much so that the bartender would have called it not a double but a quintuple whiskey, and drank it like water. That's what he'd come to. It was only then that he let go a little, the tight knot of fear loosened, and he could breathe. The waitress came over and put a plate of sausage and breadcrumbs in front of him. There's nothing else. He heard her apologetic tone and thought he should pay at once. He didn't know how his sit-down was going to end. The girl immediately understood his gesture. It meant both no change and get out of here. It seemed like an hour or more had passed. Jeremy was sipping his whiskey now and thinking about the fact that there was no way he was going to be able to play in the open. The odds were too unequal, and there was very little chance that the trap he had planned would work. He realized that this time he was risking not his freedom, but his life. And these creatures were capable of such a thing that death would seem like deliverance. Someone sat down across from him, and Jeremy looked up. It was a girl, very young, in a blue dress. She kept her eyes on him, and he thought the waitress had called her. Maybe she felt sorry for him. From the outside, he must have epitomized bitter loneliness. Or maybe she thought he was a tempting prey, easy to get her hands on for money. "Would you like a drink?" he asked the girl. "Then get yourself a glass." It seemed to him that everyone now wanted to escape the madness of the big by immersing themselves in the small. The girl drank and said something to him, touching his hand lightly. And she was sneaking sausage off the plate, sneaking it, trying to be sneaky. She wanted to look pretty, but she was probably very hungry. Jeremy could see that she was trying to please him. For the first time in a long time, he looked with that attentive gaze in which his gift was awakening. Yeah, she was living on a shoestring. She rented a room for two with a friend and spent the money she earned on clothes. After her poverty-stricken childhood, she was attracted to every brightly colored rag. She couldn't get enough of everything. Now she needed shoes, pink, high heels. But she really liked him young, nice-looking, not pushy. He had to go, damn it, he had to go. He took 2 red bills out of his wallet, placed them on the table, and then took the girl's hand and put her palm down on the bills. "Kathleen," he said, "buy yourself some shoes." He patted her shoulder a little and went on his way, ignoring her shocked face. He knew the address, and it appeared that it was the same boulevard he had to follow all the way to the end. A streetcar rang on his right hand. Here was a photographer, laying out national costumes on a bench, waiting for customers. A store selling shawarma and chibareks. An old building of a polyclinic. Fountains. The boulevard rose upward, and every now and then the level path was replaced by steps, and one could not sink into deep reverie as he wished. One had to remember not to stumble. Finally, when he couldn't wait any longer, Jeremy sighed a deep, convulsive sigh. Shoving his hands in his pockets, he walked toward the house. Toward the house. He expected to find the place dilapidated and desolate, but he stopped in amazement. The house had clearly become truly residential, and the new owner had decided to make it as good as any. The white plastic windows seemed decidedly out of harmony with the brick, which was not even 100 years old. He also noticed the curtains obviously new. What is this doing? Jeremy looked around, as if he wanted to call the people around him as witnesses. He noticed the old man next door, who was looking at him with his eyes shaded from the sun. "No one's home," said the old man. "The landlady hasn't come yet." Jeremy realized that the conversation might be a respite for him, and walked over to the fence that separated 1 yard from the other. "Who's the hostess?" "You don't know." Now the old man's look was suspicious. "What's the matter? Do you want to buy a house?" Not exactly. Well, how, in fact, was to explain everything to an ignorant person. In a few days About here, I have to meet. Friends. They know the landlady well, and I just arrived earlier. "So you're a guest?" The old man went on inquiring. His eyebrows were white and bushy, which made him look menacing. "Children are afraid of such old men. Have you come to visit?" "Sort of." "Can you tell me a little bit about the missus?" "I don't like gossip." The old man wanted to get back to his business, but he said, "Especially in this house, gossiping is not worth it." And that was a clue to a new conversation, because after those words Jeremy couldn't move away from the fence. No amount of force would make him. "I hear there are some bad things going on in this house," he said casually. "Heard from where?" "From whom?" And again the look of those blue eyes, so bright they seemed icy. But hell, he couldn't tell the old man that this house is a kind of dining room for ... After that, the neighbor. If he says anything, it will be on the phone. Dialing 03, "Come here. There's a psycho. Take him away before he makes trouble." "I used to live in this town," Jeremy said with the look of a man in a hurry who wanted to talk. "And I remember the circus used to stop here. Right on this lawn." But these words of the old man were unexpectedly convincing. Who indeed could have known about it except the old-timer? It was a long time ago. You must have been very young. How can you not remember ... Here, everyone who lives around here were afraid that these lunatics would do something crazy. They'd get drunk, set fire to something drunk, God forbid. They'd get into a fight. They didn't. In general, the circus has come here twice in my memory. Jeremy raised his eyebrows in surprise. Yeah, that's the case you were talking about. That was 25 years ago. And before that you still have to measure a quarter. You weren't around then, but I was then, like you are now. Well, it's been 25 years again. Maybe they'll come again. They will, Jeremy said thoughtfully, yet confidently. They can't not come. I was surprised it had been so long, and I thought the house had been torn down. At that time it was ownerless. You can't tear this house down that easily. He is himself, but the old man did not continue. Were you inside? Jeremy knew he had been, but he could only read his mind when the old man started to remember. And the old man told him that it was strange for many years he had never established such a relationship with any of the inhabitants of the house that he could easily visit each other. It's like a kaleidoscope. Some lived there, then others I can't remember them all. Once a young couple asked me to feed their cat, they left me the key. They were going somewhere. I went and fed it. Well, it's all right. The old man's gesture begone. Begone was completely unexpected. Jeremy flinched. What is it? On the third day, a cat went missing. He disappeared from a locked house. I wanted to give up myself by then. It seems like everything is normal around there. Well, the most ordinary things. But when you walk around the rooms, you start to see the hell of what you see. I've never suffered from nerves. But this is not good at all. There's no animal, that's all. And all the windows are closed. I think, how will I report to the young ones? And they didn't come back. They left, and that was the end of it. I've kept the key to the house ever since. No one's ever asked me for it. The new owners must have changed the lock. It's not the main door, not the front door, but the back door. I see. And tell me about the last hostess. Jeremy knew that a house could change hands in many ways, but only its true owners could pass it on. It's just a girl, Miranda. She inherited it. Only she gave it to her mother-in-law right away. She's the one who's been renovating it. Young people don't need all that. The land, greenhouses. They're not ready to put down roots yet. They've got wind in their heads, going here and there. My mother-in-law doesn't live here yet, but she'll probably move in soon. She's already brought some potted flowers. I don't think they'll survive here. There's not enough light. You wouldn't happen to know how to find Miranda, would you? The old man shrugged. I think she works at a maternity hospital. And there's only one in town. But I can't say for sure whether she is there or not. All the same, Jeremy shook the old man's hand sincerely. Thank you very much. The He was lucky the second time, which was much more important. The first time he'd found a suitable hotel at the first request, and there was room. And now, when he looked up the phone number of the maternity hospital on the internet and asked for Miranda, a girl came up. As soon as he started talking about the house, he knew from her startled silence that it was her. Can I meet you? He asked. Jeremy was prepared for Miranda to refuse him, and then he'd come to her in the hospital and lay down his life, but she'd listen to him. The girl doesn't realize that she's destined to be the bloody delicatessen at the meal that's already in progress. And only if they act together will she have a chance. His own chance will increase a little. But there's no risk. What do you want to tell me? Heard Jeremy. Please preferably today pick any place that is convenient for you. I'll take half an hour tops. She must have heard the pleading intonations in his voice, was silent for a few moments, and then said with determination, Good. There's a little cafe near this house. I'll meet you there. At 4 o'clock. Miranda was almost half an hour late. It wasn't much longer. Sometimes her husband had to wait for her until late in the evening. That meant another woman in labor wasn't doing so well. But now she was standing in this small cafe, which was more like a diner, and squinting at the room. Who should recognize whom, he, her, or she, him? She wondered later how she could have thought she wouldn't recognize him at once. A young man was sitting by the window. At first she wondered if there was a movie being filmed somewhere. He looked like the hero of a movie from the 50s. A light-colored coat, dark hair, thin features. And yes, it was him. The same one who had been coming to her in her deepest deaf dreams for many years. He raised his head. He saw at once the picture that stood before her eyes. He small, dirty, exhausted in a cage, and she, pushing on the bolt. They looked at each other, and not a single word was spoken. But they talked. It can't be. It can't be that you got this house. I'm sure this inheritance is from her. She's the one who said, you'll remember my gift. Do you know what that means? Yeah, and I don't hold out much hope of surviving. This house is a monster. You should hear it when you walk through it, the way it crunches. It's like it's kneading its bones, stretching, smelling you. A waitress came to their table, and both of them had to return to reality. Miranda wondered what the girl thought of them. They looked like a strange couple with their silent game. Without taking her eyes off Jeremy, she took the menu. Still, she had to make an effort. Tattered pages and worn plastic. Miranda thought her friend must be hungry. She was suddenly hungry too. And that was a sure sign that, despite the approaching danger, she felt a kind of confidence. Usually when she was worried, she had no appetite. But now she wasn't alone. Bring us dumplings. With broth? With sour cream? With tomato? 2 double servings. And a cup of sour cream each. They didn't notice whether they had waited long enough to order. They had too much to say to each other. How have you been living? You're asking me if I've ever forgotten that. Oh yeah. Dreams? In the orphanage they said that I often scream in my sleep. The boys used to wake me up ... when I started studying at the institute. I got hooked on pills. Antidepressants? Yeah. Chuckles. Are you married? How could I get married if I waited every day for them to get to me? They come out of nowhere. If an outsider saw all this, they'd go crazy. We didn't go crazy because we were kids. Kids are more flexible. So no wife. And I don't have kids for the same reason. They glanced over with a bitter smile of equals. Were you really hoping this would all be over for you if you gave the house to your mother-in-law? It hung on me like a weight, she admitted. I wouldn't have taken it at all, mine made me. And I also tried to talk myself into it. How do I know it was her gift? And when I went in there, I realized the house couldn't be anything else. It smells like them. They're beasts, their sweat and their powder. And I'm the only one who smells it, no one else. In everyone's eyes were crazy. They brought the dumplings. Steam was still rising above them. The smell of meat and bay leaf interrupted the memories of the terrible. Both of them gorged themselves on the food. I've tried to forget, she said when her plate was empty, have you? And I tried to learn everything I could about them. Because the day would come, the hour would come, and then there would be no getting away from it. I didn't want to be taken warm. Then explain to me. He shook his head. Don't ask me how old they are, I don't know. Some of it I had to gather from bits and pieces, some of it is speculation. Sometimes I think they're as old as the earth. Sometimes I think they come from somewhere in the Middle Ages, when people's fears materialized. And where they are now, I don't know either. Then why did you, We'll draw them up, he said. Or would you try to run away? I shouldn't. You're still so young. You'll suffer for a long time. And in the end, fear will suffocate you anyway. And how do you think you're going to lure them in? Instead of answering, he closed his eyes. It was easy to do, to be in the cage he remembered, down to every scratch on the iron bars, every crevice in the floorboards. He remembered how many steps along, across, and askew. On the crevice that blew him especially hard on cold days. He would have gnawed out a loophole to escape, but they guarded not only his body but his thoughts, which was far worse. And when this girl opened the door for him, he concentrated on not thinking, not about anything else, only the pain from the nails digging into his palms. But as he gathered on the internet, in libraries, in bookstores, everything that might have touched them, he called on his memory again, painful though it was. But it required separating the grain from the chaff, figuring out what was true and what was false, and memory was the only thing he could rely on. He knew them too well to take certain things on faith. You're weaker than I am, he said. You hear only my thoughts and I hear everyone's. But now they're onto you. Maybe it's just revenge. Oh, they're very vindictive. Or maybe they're just hungry. This house isn't the only one. And when they get hungry, they wander into one of the houses like people wander into a diner. Usually it's on a harvest day an hour. This time they'll come for you, but if they know I'm here, they'll come early. She asked a little audibly. And we'll have to make sure the house wakes up early too, so that it will take them, not us, for food. She shook her head fearfully. You're groping. You're not sure of anything. And we're risking too much. You won't get another chance. Do you have the key to the house? I gave everything to my mother-in-law. I can't go to the house alone. She'll definitely follow me. Luckily, my neighbor still has the key. He's had it for ages, but maybe the lock hasn't been changed. Let's go check it out. They were indeed hungry, but only those who knew their true nature could see that. To everyone else, they were just ordinary people who met twice a day at a common table in the caravan where EVA lived. In the mornings they drank tea, and in the evenings after the shows they stayed up late, the smell of charcoal grilled meat stirring the nostrils of passers-by. But a knowledgeable person would have noticed the twitching of their hands, which had suddenly become dry, the wrinkles on their faces, and the light that sometimes flashed in their eyes. They knew that when they were truly satiated, they would get rid of the signs of age and the hunger that tormented them from within. But they sometimes had to endure long enough, for not every prey was suitable. The prey had to be different from the human herd, and it was not always possible to find a suitable one. Immortality comes at a high price, and not everyone could withstand it. There used to be more of them, many more, but some had fallen behind along the way. This Vera ... she'd asked to be let go, to be left to live near one of their houses. What the hell she was eating there, picking up scum. No wonder she eventually grew old and died. Eve felt her death. She was the most empathetic of them all, always knowing exactly what they needed and how they could get it. So it came naturally that she became senior to them. But never had she met such an attractive prey as that boy. That was why no one dared to infringe on his life. Their power multiplied with him, and he was bound to become one of them sooner or later, if he hadn't escaped. Now they will have to settle for less, much less. Vera is gone, and now their cottage belongs to someone else ... Well, happiness for the owners if they don't mess around. Can you feel it? Miranda asked as they entered the house. Jeremy made a sign with his hand to wait. He stepped as carefully as if he were walking on a taut wire, carefully calibrating his every step, holding his breath. He was afraid to disturb, to wake the house before its time. And yet it seemed to Miranda that something was already beginning to happen. The air wavered slightly, as it would over a campfire. The floorboards crackled a little louder, and the floor seemed to waver slightly. Then Jeremy couldn't stand it, pointed to the new window and raised his eyebrows slightly. "It's the mother-in-law," Miranda whispered hastily. "She's in charge of all the changes around here. I wonder how the house didn't chew her arm off. She is so mediocre that she was probably of no interest to him." And they managed to get the key without any problems. The old man even followed them to see if the young man could open the back door. He had kept the key for so many years, and he was curious. Jeremy saw at once that the key would fit. It slid into the keyhole so easily that it turned on its own. The old man left, and they entered the house. Here not only did the corridor that ran through the entire mansion begin. From here, from the back door, stone steps led down to the cellar. That's where they both went down in the first place. Of course, Peggy Urton, with her great household plans, couldn't help getting to this corner of the house. The cellar was empty, the workmen having removed all the junk that had accumulated there over the years. And the shelving units they'd ordered hadn't arrived yet. Just a dungeon. Just a crypt. A ray of light, which seemed blue, fell from a narrow window in the ceiling. Jeremy stood a few feet from the window, his head up. The light had transformed his face. Too, it had lost its natural color, drenched in that dead blue. Jeremy closed his eyes and whispered something inaudible. Miranda realized that the irreversible was happening now. He was calling out to them, and he seemed to have succeeded in reaching their minds. Then he opened his eyes and turned to Miranda, but his gaze was crazy, like that of a frightened child. She took both his hands. "Did you succeed?" He tried to swallow. It didn't work on the first try. "They'll be here tomorrow night." "And what are they?" "They can't believe their happiness." Peggy Urton ventured to spend the first night in her new home. Her bedroom had been ready for a long time. But to be honest, the new owner had dreamed of doing things differently. To organize a housewarming party, to invite her friends, and after a noisy feast, scattered among the rooms to sleep soundly and without dreams. It was a little scary to be alone. But the party was postponed. That friend, without whom it made no sense to organize all this, went to her daughter, and for a long time. She would be back in a month at the earliest, and Peggy Urton couldn't wait that long. "I'm as curious as Eve," she liked to say on every occasion. And now she convinced herself that there was nothing to be afraid of, that this was not some forgotten corner. This was a city, and there were people on the right and on the left. Of course, no one would dare to rob a mansion. It was not like robbing a cottage. But she chided herself for not ordering bars for the windows, and decided to do it soon. She arrived at her new home without telling her son or his wife. With a light load in her hands and a bad headache. She arrived that very evening, a couple hours before sunset. She'd been thinking since morning that she'd make a feast for herself, fry some chops while singing, open some wine. But now the thought of food made her sick. Peggy Urton dropped 2 green pills into the palm of her hand and took a drink of tap water. She thought for a moment and added another pill for her blood pressure, just in case. Wrinkling her nose and putting her fingers to her temples, it was a little cold in the house, and her hands were still icy. She made her way to the bedroom, lay down, and covered herself with a downy shawl. She expected the pain to continue for a long time, but it suddenly receded, and unnoticed, Peggy Urton fell asleep. "They're sure it'll be business as usual," Jeremy said as they settled by the window. "After all, the deadline, 25 years, is only a few days away. That's why they'll come in to get us, you can be sure of it. They're getting close." Miranda didn't ask now if he'd succeeded in waking the house. She could sense that he was almost awake. The visions that tormented her became brighter. They flashed in succession. Wherever she looked, she saw the victims, their last moments, while for the house itself they were memories pleasant to the point of shivering, gastronomic. Miranda tried to look only at Jeremy. He was her only hope of getting out of here alive. "Why did you become a midwife?" he asked suddenly. "Ever since I've been there, I've just carried the breath of death with me," she said simply. "I wanted to be closer to the birth of life. Displace it, did you? And I wanted to know what kind of power I had been given. Why am I like this? Are there others like me?" They were silent. Maybe it lasted a long time, maybe a few moments. Something warm and sticky dripped down Miranda's cheek. She tried to wipe it away and suddenly realized. The house is drooling. You could hear the panic in her whisper. Instead of answering, he pointed to the window. She didn't understand at first, and then she was numb. There was a lawn in front of the house, lit by the light of lanterns, and there were shadows moving across it. Those tales of the unclean, which seemed so faded and naive now, assured her that the undead didn't reflect in mirrors or give shadows. But now they saw with their own eyes no people, just shadows on the grass. Here a man in a hat, here a woman in a long dress. An old woman with a beak, and more women, and men. Men. The shadows flocked to the front door, which was thoughtfully ajar. Peggy Urton woke up with a pounding heart, as if she'd had a nightmare. She didn't remember the plot of the dream, though, and she didn't understand what there was to be afraid of, but the feeling of dread wouldn't go away. She reached for the phone on the nightstand and turned it on to see what time it was. It showed that she had slept for only a little while, about 2 hours. Everything looked so calm. Moonlight was pouring in through the window, no noise. She was surrounded by things that she herself had chosen in the stores, then commanded the movers who brought them in and arranged them. There was no one and nothing foreign, nothing alien in her room. Only shadows lay on the floor, special nocturnal shadows. But should one be afraid of shadows? And yet something was happening. She looked closely and listened. Everything shook slightly. It couldn't have been an earthquake, for it had never happened in their land. It sounded more like the shaking of a horse that couldn't wait to get out of its seat. Peggy Urton hastily put on her glasses, raked her dressing gown from the chair. She never had premonitions, nor did she believe in them. But the feeling that came over her was so strong, so primal, that she could not help obeying it. Where are those damn slippers? And what on earth is going on, gentlemen? What is it? Miranda whispered. Why did they come dressed like that? She could see sadness, if not doom, in Jeremy's gaze, but his voice was as firm as ever. Maybe he wanted to reassure her with that tone. Like this? Because they've come for us, and no one else is supposed to see them. What do they want to do with us? And I don't know about me, but they want you alive. Not anymore. I mean alive not in the sense that you and I understand it. Most likely they want to make me one of them. But first. I read how they take people. True. It's a legend, but what can we rely on but legends? Nothing else. First, they become our shadows. Can we escape our own shadows? Never. Only the shadow follows the man, but now it will be the other way around. We will have to follow them. But you don't, do you? It's not, is it? Let's run to the basement. Hurry. They shouldn't have been able to turn on the lights, and there shouldn't have been the slightest noise from them. What force helped them not to trip on the steps? Jeremy held Miranda's hand tightly by the wrist. That's how you hold babies. Only the walls flashed. If the house really was surrounded on all sides, it would be a total failure. But they were lucky when they ran up the steps to the back door and opened it. There was nothing but lawn in front of them. The lawn, which here was lighted only by the moon, and the darkening garden beyond it. One last dash. When they reached the lilac bushes, they took cover behind them. "Now watch what happens," Jeremy said quietly. She could rather read it on his lips. "But what if things don't go your way? If the house is with them?" He shrugged. "There's nothing more we can do anyway." Several endless languid moments passed. Maybe during this time the circus ghosts were searching the house? And then, Miranda and Jeremy were startled by a sharp bang. It was the front door slamming shut. Then the blows came one after another, but not as hard. It was the slamming of the shutters on the windows. The house clenched its jaws. If someone stood watching the ancient mansion from across the street at this late-night hour, they would probably think they were hallucinating. It was like a stereo picture. When a kind of miracle happens before your eyes, the perspective changes, and you see something no one else sees. The house stood still, but there, inside it, some living organism was clenching its teeth. Huge jaws were walking. Someone invisible was satisfying a fierce hunger. In vain, the prey battered at the closed windows and doors. The desperate screams were silent to everyone. Almost everyone. Only the couple hiding in the lilac bushes behind the house could hear them. Miranda fell to the grass, covering her ears with her hands. She was used to the screams of women in labor, but she couldn't hear these undead cries. "Look at the smoke," she heard Jeremy's voice. Overcoming herself, she raised her head. No one would flood the boiler in the summer. Only in mid-autumn would you see smoke rising from the chimneys above the roofs. But over this house there was smoke. Thick pink changed to red, the color of fire, or blood. The smoke rose to the sky and melted into it. Are we the only ones seeing this too? Or are the neighbors calling the fire department now? Jeremy didn't answer her question. He couldn't take his eyes off the frightening and mesmerizing sight. It took quite some time before the screams subsided. Here was the last faint moan and a ringing silence. The smoke had dried up. And then, Miranda was ready to wipe her eyes. But it wasn't imagined, it was really happening. Right before her eyes, the house began to deteriorate, returning to its true age. Cracks ran down the white walls, the whiteness darkening into a dirty gray. The roof was decrepit, and in some places holes appeared in it. Instead of the now empty black openings, like eye sockets in a decaying skull. The door snapped and hung on one hinge. The outbuilding collapsed, but silently, as if in a silent movie. Now the house in front of them was not a house, but a ruin that was God knows how old. Yin and yang, Ouroboros biting itself by the tail. Everything in the world is interconnected, and the end of one thing becomes the beginning of another. And the beginning inevitably leads to the end. What did it all mean? Miranda felt like she was teetering on the brink of losing her mind. "They're not coming back," Jeremy rose with such difficulty, as if he were as old as these ruins. "It seems they can't exist without each other." The house was too hungry, and his hosts came in handy. They were its last meal. It's all over now. But Miranda couldn't get up. She had no strength. She sat on the ground, ruffling her hair with her hands, which were shaking. She couldn't even cry from the shock. But they heard the crying. A normal human cry. A woman's bitter. "Who's that?" "Neighbors?" Jeremy held out his hand to Miranda and helped her up. A woman stood a few steps away from the house. A heavy figure, robe and barefoot slippers. Miranda squinted, something familiar to her. "Wait, there's no way." "Elena? What brings Peggy here?" "Who?" "My mother-in-law." Miranda let go of Jeremy's hand and ran awkwardly, as if her legs weren't quite right yet. Yes, it was Peggy Urton. She stood there sobbing, putting her fists in her mouth, probably to keep from howling. "What is it? What is it?" she repeated. "How did you get here?" The women, young and old, stood a stone's throw from each other. "Why? The gas couldn't have exploded in here, could it? Why did the whole place collapse?" Peggy Urton was as confused as a small child. "You guys slept here?" Miranda finally got the message. The mother-in-law nodded shallowly. The first night. Rejoice that you made it out in time, that you're alive." Miranda took hold of her head again. "God, they almost killed Vitya's mother." Tell me, did you destroy this place? Maybe you regretted writing the deed of gift to me. You thought you didn't want me to have the house? Why would you do that? Why ruin everything? I mean, it would have gone to you in the end." Miranda looked at her mother-in-law with wide eyes and couldn't understand what she was asking her. "So it's you." Peggy was already howling. "Do you think I'm what?" Miranda covered her eyes. "Breathe," she told herself. She had to focus on breathing, or she would collapse right now, right here, just like these walls. This night had cost her too much. The street was no longer quiet. Late passers-by, neighbors running out of their houses. Some were aghast, some were filming the ruins of the house on their phones. Some were calling and demanding to send rescuers and an ambulance. The "why call anyone now ... the voices were humming, merging into the steady noise of a swarm of bees. Miranda looked back. The clearing behind her was empty. Only the moon, the grass, and the shadows of the sprawling lilac bushes. "So how did it end?" Jeremy asked. "We sold the plot." "And they sold it very well." William finally got involved. "The place is golden." They grabbed the land with their hands. "Of course everything here will be demolished. The new owner will build." "And new Hosea," and Jeremy said the words, almost syllabically, emphasizing the last one. "A very down-to-earth man. He has his own business. He drills wells for people. And he has a big family, a wife and 4 sons. The boys will be out there racing in the garden with their dog. And we bought my mother-in-law a summer house. She cried so much her dream was gone, and all her savings. She spent everything for this house. Her credit card is bare now. She sold her shares. She told us I'd become a beggar. So William picked out a big house for her, big enough for all her friends. I think she's a bit relieved now." Jeremy nodded. They stood at the bus station, waiting for his bus to arrive. He'd wanted to leave yesterday, but Miranda had asked him to wait a day. She wanted to say goodbye to him. She had been on night duty the night before, and now she came running straight from the hospital, tortured. He knew those sunken, and yet somehow peculiarly shining eyes a sign of long sleeplessness and of the fact that the hard duty had ended well. "Why don't you stay?" she repeated for the 1,500th time. They both knew that he had no one to rush to accept his patience. And they also knew the axiom that he could only stay if they were together. Otherwise, tearing up his soul, it's even harder than fighting ghosts. Shadows. And there was only one moment when he asked her that question, with his eyes. It didn't require a mental conversation, just a look. "Do you love me? Will you go away with me?" he asked. Her answering look expressed both struggle and anguish at the same time. And that was enough. He couldn't hurt her. She had a debt to the man who had once saved her, and who had taken care of her all these years. The heavy bus slowly pulled out of the parking lot, pulled up to the platform. The doors opened. "Go on. Take the window seat." Jeremy put his arms around her and pulled her against him. They stood like that, swaying slightly. She closed her eyes. Never had she felt so peaceful and blissful. Never. Not even in the cradle. "You promise? Do you remember?" They had said it almost simultaneously. Now they were looking at each other. He wiped the tears from her cheeks with his palm. "If ever anything else ... this devil's circus is similar ... if even just a premonition. I'll call you. I'll be there. I promise. I remember." He pulled away so gently that she didn't feel it right away. She saw him coming up the steps to the bus. ... It was over. But there was still eternity, the one where evil is only an accident, and where there is no fear of losing each other, for their 2 souls can become one.